Okay, welcome everybody. Today I'm going to discuss about the allegory of Sarah and Hagar and why it is so important. So to begin with, I want to begin all this with a small foundational thing, and that foundational thing is Habakkuk 2:4. The end of Habakkuk 2:4 says, "The just shall live by faith." We all know that verse, very uh, familiar with us, and it's used by Paul. And it's used by Paul in three places. It's used by Paul in Romans, here in Galatians, and in Hebrews. And it's important because now that uh, I shouldn't say we found them, now that the Dead Sea Scrolls has been revealed and they've been interpreted and or given to the whole world, we see something. The Essenes at Qumran, from which John the Baptist came from. When it says that he came out of the wilderness of the desert, he was coming from Qumran. He was part of the Essene community. They were the Zadok, priests of Zadok that had came out, or Zadok, and they were righteous. They rejected the temple in Jerusalem. They rejected the Pharisees and the Sadducees that ran it, and that's where they were. But we found something there. We found many things there, of course, people know. But one of the most important documents that pertains to us that we found was the Habakkuk Pesher. It was a document that was their interpretation of Habakkuk, the book of Habakkuk. And when it talks about the just shall live by faith in Habakkuk 2:4, they explain what that means. And what that means, how they saw that, is they understood it to mean that the just, the righteous, will live by faith. The faith and that faith in that Habakkuk Pesher is defined as patiently awaiting the arrival of the promised seed, the Messiah. That's what that verse meant to them. That's John the Baptist's understanding of Habakkuk 2:4 when he appears in our scriptures and comes out of the desert to prepare the way for Yeshua. That was his understanding of Habakkuk 2:4. The just shall live by faith, trusting faithfulness in the coming of the promised seed that Yahuwah promised all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. That's what their hope was. That's what that verse meant to them. And that's how they walked. That's how they lived their lives. That's how a person could walk under the ordinances of the book of the law, under the administration or the age of law, righteously. Just like John the Baptist's parents did, Zechariah and Elizabeth, it says that they walked in all the ordinances of Yahuwah blameless, right? These people, Qumranians, did the same thing because they kept it by faith. Their hearts were circumcised. They understood why it was given. It was teaching them about the prophet that would come, the promised seed, the Messiah. They knew that. They were interpreting it and they were watching for him to come. That's what Habakkuk 2:4 means to them. And that is the same understanding that the Apostle Paul has when he quotes Habakkuk 2:4 in his writings, as we'll see, right? The just will live by faith, not just by living good lives, but they were looking for the promised seed that Yahuwah had promised them. That was the point, and that's really kind of important to understand. So check that out for yourself. But Paul quotes Habakkuk 2:4, Romans chapter 1, verse 17, Galatians chapter 3, verse 11, and Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38. If you believe that Hebrews was written by Paul, I do. Whether it was or not, Habakkuk 2:4 is written, quoted in Hebrews 10:38. So I'd like to start, and that's the background of this. So keep that in your mind. So what I would like to do is talk about Sarah and Hagar. Sarah and Hagar, Galatians chapter, really the whole book of Galatians is really important. It's very, very important because we know that Galatians is one of Paul's earliest epistles he wrote, right? We know that he wrote this during the period covered, the 40-year additional period of mercy that Yahuwah granted Israel, even though they killed his son, but Yeshua did the same thing that Moses did, right? Yahuwah was going to destroy and judge Israel on Mount Sinai because of the golden calf. Moses mediated, begged for mercy, so Yahuwah relented, showed them mercy, instead cut another covenant with them, incorporated parts from the first covenant, like the 10 commandments. He made new commandments, wrote the two on the 10 words, but there was something different about this covenant. And the difference was there was a priesthood appointed over them. It was a priesthood appointed over them, and you can find that in Exodus chapter 34. But, okay, so Galatians chapter 4. Let's just start in verse 11. Verse 21. Tell me, you who want to be under law, if you go back to chapter 3, read in verse 10, Paul tells you what law he's referring to here. He's talking about the book of the law, the Levitical law that was added at Mount Sinai. It was put on the nation of Israel, and it was put there after their sin of the golden calf, instead of Yahuwah destroying everybody and starting again with Moses. So it was a great act of mercy by the Father. It was merciful. So tell me, you who want to be under the book of the law, do you not listen to the law? Or you can say Levitical law. That's what Paul describes it as. Chapter 3 tells you that. Because it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the servant woman and one by the free woman, right? Isaac and Ishmael. But the son of the servant woman had been born according to the flesh. Remember, Hagar, Sarah tells Abraham, go have relations with Hagar so I can have a son through her. Even though Yahuwah had already told them that she was going to have a son. So while the son by the free woman through the promise, right? We're well familiar with this story. We know we're following Paul here. We're tracking with him, right? We understand what happened with Hagar and Ishmael, and then Sarah with Isaac, and what happened, right? We understand that. Verse 24, hear these words. This is spoken with allegory. Because these women are two covenants. Sarah and Hagar was supposed to teach them something. These are two covenants. One from Mount Sinai. Which one is that? We know what that was, don't we? We know exactly what that was, don't we? It's in the book of Exodus, right? Exodus, read chapters 19 on through, and you will see what it is talking about at Mount Sinai. So this is one of them. Bearing children into slavery. She is Hagar. So the covenant at Mount Sinai, the covenant. So if you are one that believes that the book of the law that was added afterwards was not a covenant, then the covenant this can only be talking about is the one that was cut in Exodus 19 through 24. So if that's true, then that covenant is Hagar. That covenant's Hagar. It talks about a physical land, right? The first covenant at Mount Sinai, whether you believe it's the one spoken of in Exodus 19 through 24, or you believe it's the one that was imposed after, which is also a covenant. And we can let's just look at that really quick without going into any explanation. Okay. Now, the book of Exodus doesn't read in chronological order. If you've done a careful study, you know that there's sections. Okay, but we do know that Exodus 34 came after the golden calf because Yahuwah was replacing the two tablets that Moses had broke. Now Yahuwah said to Moses, carve out for yourself 2 stone tablets like the former ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets, which you shattered. Then he does it. Verse 10, then Yahuwah said, just listen to the words, guys. Let's just listen and believe, okay? Again, context. This is after the golden calf. These are the second set of tablets that Yahuwah wrote, which are identical to the first set of tablets that was broken. Then Yahuwah said, behold, I am going to cut a covenant before all your people, and I will, not I have done, I will do wondrous deeds which have not been created in all the earth, nor among any of the nations. And all the people among you will see the working of Yahuwah, for it is a fearful thing that I'm going to do with you. Right? And then he goes down. Be sure to keep what I am commanding you this day. Behold, I'm going to drive you out, the Amorite before you, the Canaanite, all the way down, right? It's the same covenant as before. He told Abraham, you're gonna inherit this land. In order for them to inherit the land, Yahuwah was going to drive out those in the land. This is what it's saying, right? Verse 12, beware, unless you cut a covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you are going, and unless it becomes a snare among you. But rather, you are to tear down their altars and shatter their sacred pillars and cut down their asherim. For you shall not worship any other little g god. For Yahuwah, whose name is a jealous God. Unless you cut a covenant with the inhabitants of the land and they play the harlot and their gods and they sacrifice and on, right? He is cutting a covenant. And then verse 24, for I will dispose nations before you and enlarge your borders. This is not an enlargement covenant only that is going to, God's telling him, okay, this is just a special covenant meant just to enlarge your borders. That's not true. Yahweh is telling them, you're going in the promised land. I'm going to remove your enemies before you, and I'm going to expand your borders as you go so you can fill the land of promise that I promised to give you. That's what it's talking about. This isn't a separate covenant because he's already told them you're going to inherit the land from the river in Egypt to the Euphrates River. He's already said that. Now he's telling them, I'm going to remove these people out of your way when you go in to inherit the land. And he's telling them, and then you're going to expand your borders as I eliminate these people, as you walk in faithfulness to the covenant I'm cutting with you. I'm going to remove these people, and you're going to expand your borders out to the promised land that he said he was going to give them. That's what that's talking about, in my opinion. So, verse 27, then we'll go back. Then Yahuwah said to Moses, write down these words, because in accordance with these words, the ones we just read, and all the tabernacle and all that stuff before that was mentioned, according to these words, I have cut a covenant with you and with Israel. So the book of the law was a covenant. Unless these words mean something that they don't. Something other than Berit that covenants always mean. This was a covenant. Yes, the first covenant, the one that they broke, was incorporated in absolutely because it was the same rules, same terms and conditions, because the first covenant that was given to Abraham was given through faith. And that same faith was the only thing that was going to redeem them and allow them to walk in the law that was given and imposed on them righteously, like Zechariah and Elizabeth did. So when it says former covenant, this is spoken with allegory because these women are 2 covenants. One from Mount Sinai, that's this one. That's this one. The first one, which includes Exodus 19 through 24, as well as the chapters after, because Yahuwah brought the 10 commandments into the imposed one and cut a new covenant with them. And that covenant included the terms and conditions of the first one brought in that they broke with added stuff. And he imposed a law, and then we see Joshua. He adds to the book of the law later, then it's added to again later. Okay? Because it was an imposition, it was a stewardship, it was a tutor, a babysitter, a guide to show them the promised seed when he would come. That was its purpose, don't forget. Now back to Galatians chapter 4. This is spoken with allegory because these women are two covenants, one from Mount Sinai, bearing children into slavery. She is Hagar. Now, this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, verse 25 of Galatians 4, and corresponds to the present Jerusalem because she is in slavery with her children. Verse 26. But there's the contrast. On the other hand, the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother because it is written. Because it is written. Isaiah 54:1. Rejoice, barren woman who does not give birth. Who's that? Sarah, remember? Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor, because more numerous are the children of the desolate one, Sarah, than of the one who has a husband. And you, brothers, in accordance with Isaac, remember Romans 9? Not all Israel are Israel, right? They're not, the children of Yahuwah are not called in Abraham. They're called in Isaac. Because true Israel are children of promise. But at that time, he who was born according to the flesh was persecuting him who was born according to the Spirit. So it is also now. Read the book of Acts. It will show you that fact. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the servant woman and her son. Hagar and her son cast out. Because the son of the servant woman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brothers, we are not children of a servant woman, but of the free woman. If Hagar and Sarah are two covenants, and Hagar was the one at Mount Sinai, and Sarah was the new covenant in the Messiah, what is he saying? So let's look at Romans chapter 2. And let's start in verse 28. We're going to read Romans 2, 28 and 29. Because he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, neither is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. Do we hear these words? Nor is true circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But the contrast word, on the other hand, he is a Jew who was one inwardly. And the circumcision is that which is of the heart, by the Spirit, by the means of the Spirit, not by the letter. And his praise is not from men, but from Yahuwah. Chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. If you can't quite follow along, just go back and pause this, or just take notes and look them up later. Romans 9, verses 6 through 9. Again, Sarah and Hagar. When I'm telling you what these are, guys, this is Sarah and Hagar. So hear these. Here, we need to hear it. But it is not as though the word of Yahuwah has failed, because they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel. They are not counted as true Israel just because they are naturally born Israelites. That's what he's saying there, right? Nor are they all children because they are Abraham's seed. Sarah, but contrast, through Isaac your seed will be named. That is, the children of the flesh, physical Israel, are not the children of Yahuwah, are not the children of Yahuwah. But the contrast word, on the other hand, the children of the promise are counted as seed. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Seed. Promised as seed. Is it talking about just being a true Israelite here? Yeah. But what else is it telling us here? Remember what Paul told us in Galatians about seed in Galatians 3? He said the promise was given to Abraham and his seed. It does not say seeds as concerning many, but seed as in one, and that is Messiah. So those that are in him are the seed that was covenanted to Abraham. You're counted as the seed of Abraham because you are in Messiah if you have cut a covenant with him, the new one, then you are in him. Therefore, you are the righteous seed promised in that covenant because you're in him and your lives are hid with the Messiah in his Father, Yahuwah. We're his seed. We are the seed because we're in him, because of what he did, because of his faithfulness to us. We reached out by faith from our hearts. He reached down from heaven with his right hand, grabbed us, and keeps us, gives us life. What you do with that life is what you will stand in the bema seat, the judgment seat of the Messiah, and answer for how good of a steward have you been? Have you been the one talent guy that took that precious gift he gave you and buried it in the ground to keep it safe till he comes? Then you will be receiving the reward of a baby. Or are you going to be the 10 guy that takes that one precious seed he's given you and propagates it? So he can come back and tell you, well done, good and faithful servant. Come on, guys, it's life versus reigning, living versus reigning, being a born baby, a newborn baby drinking milk, compared with a full-grown adult with a full set of dentition that can eat and digest meat. That's the difference, Paul. Paul writes to the meat eaters. Paul's epistles are not meant for the babies, and if they are, and if he does address the babies, every single time he's telling them to grow up, go on to maturity. He says, stop, Hebrews 6, stop talking about baby things and grow on to maturity. Run the race so you can touch the tape, you can be an overcomer, you can walk by faithfulness, and your hope can be the heavenly city that Yeshua went to make for you. That's his teaching. That's Paul's whole teaching. Paul is not speaking to Hagar, he's speaking to Sarah. When he refers to Hagar, those under the book of the law and its administration, he's telling them to come out of it because it is not the true. It is only the type and shadow. It is not the reality. That's the whole point. That is, the children of the flesh, I'm in Romans chapter 9, again, verse 8, are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are considered as seed. Because this is the word of promise. At that time I will come. At that time I will come, and Sarah will have a son. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 1. In verse 3, we're looking at Sarah and Hagar, the allegory of the two covenants, right? That is defined, the two covenants. The first one is Mount Sinai. The second one was by the Messiah. The new covenant, right? The one that was foretold of coming. Ephesians 1:3. Blessed be the Elohim, God and Father of our Master, Yeshua the Messiah, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in the Messiah. That's Sarah, right? The Jerusalem above is free and the mother of us all. Where Yeshua said, I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house. Then I'm going to come back and get you and take you to where I am. That's the Father's house. That's up there. That's Sarah. That's Sarah. Philippians chapter 3, verse 3 tells you where the citizenship of Sarah is. Verse 3, because we are the circumcision. We already know who that is. We just read it. Just got defined to us. The one that has the inside circumcised. We are the circumcision who worship in the spirit of Yahuwah, God, and boast in Messiah Yeshua, and put no confidence in the flesh. It's not by birthright, it's not by blood, it's not by genealogy, it's by being in the new covenant, by faith with Messiah. Hebrews chapter 11. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 11. The hall of faith, right? It's going to start in verse 9. Hagar and Sarah. Remember, we're looking at Hagar and Sarah. By faith, this is Abraham. Remember the covenant Yahuwah cut with Abraham. Go to the land I'm going to show you. Tells him the borders. That was the covenant. Verse 9, by faith, that's Abraham, sojourned in the land of promise. So Yahuwah had kept his promise to Abraham individually. He brought him into the land and greatly blessed him in that land, didn't he? But by faith, Abraham, sojourned in the land of promise, just like as in a foreign land. So Abraham was occupying the actual land of promise that Yahuwah told him to go to. And he was doing it just like it was a foreign land to him. That's an incredible thing to think about. Dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise, right? The land covenant. Because this is how he was living. The reason why he was living in the land of promise with all the riches and goods and blessings he had, he still recognized he was just there as a sojourner, a traveler passing through. Why? Verse 10, because he was looking for the city which have foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Abraham was living in Hagar, but he wanted Sarah. Can't we see that? Remember when Yeshua said that Abraham saw my day and he was glad? Yahuwah showed Abraham the heavenly Jerusalem, and that is, he taught him. That's what Sarah's miraculous conception here, when you said it could have happened, that's what it represents. And you can enter into that only by trusting what Yahuwah said was going to happen and what he said was true. And by being just like Jacob, grabbing him and saying, I will not let you go unless you bless me. That's Israel. It's different. You don't need to go to Strong's or any other. Go to Genesis where it talks about it. Yahuwah tells us what Israel means. Those that strive with God and with men and overcome. That's you and I. That's all those that have entered into the new covenant because we overcome sin and death by the blood of the Lamb. Those that are Israel are those that do what the name means that Yeshua defined for us in Genesis. Those that strive and contend with God and with man and overcome. And we overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony and having faith like not loving our lives unto the death. Right? That's the remnant. That's the overcomer. That's the Joshua and Caleb that entered the promised land when the rest of the nation, including Moses, did not. Surely we can see that, right? That teaching, right? There's always that remnant. There it is. So Abraham was looking for the city that Yahuwah showed him, right? By faith, even Sarah received ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life. Since this is why, this is how she laughed, right? But then she changed, didn't she? Since she, Sarah, regarded him, Yeshua, faithful who had promised, right? The word of Yahuwah made this promise to Sarah. Who was the word of Yahuwah? Yeshua. Verse 12, therefore, because of that, they were born even of one man, and him as good as dead as that, and as many as the stars of the heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. All of these died in faith without receiving the promises, right? He received the promise of the covenant, right? That Yahuwah cut with him. He went into the land that Yahuwah showed him, and he was blessed. And any nation that touched Abraham was blessed, right? If they didn't go against him, they were blessed. So what promises? Because Abraham looked for the promise of the remnant, the faithful ones. But having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they, all those that walk by this faith, were strangers and exiles on the earth, because those who say such things bear witness or make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been remembering that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. They would have gone back. But now, contrast, on the other side, they aspire to a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Sarah. Hagar is the shadow on earth. Sarah is the one that cast a shadow in the heavenlies, a heavenly one. Therefore, Yahuwah, God, is not ashamed to be called their God or their Elohim, because he has prepared a city for them. That's Sarah. Chapter 12 and verse 22 through 24. And I'm still in 11. Let me switch over. Okay, let's start in verse 20. Hebrews 12:20. For they could not bear that which was being commanded. If even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was what happened that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. Exodus 19, right? Hagar. That's Hagar. That was a covenant that was cut about a land. But, verse 22, the contrast word, on the other hand, you, us, have come to Mount Zion. And is this Mount Zion over there in Israel? Mm-mm. And to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the myriads of messengers, and to the festal gathering and assembly, church, kahal, ecclesia of the firstborn. Remember, we looked at sonship adoption, being placed as a firstborn son and having the rights of a firstborn as compared with being a child in the family. Is the rights of a ninth or 10th born child in a large family different from the rights of the firstborn son? Absolutely. To the assembly of the firstborn ones, the sonship adoption, who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, Yahuwah, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, complete, filling up a cup, like it overflows its rim. That's what that means in the Greek. And to Yeshua, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of the bulls and goats that were shed, that was better than the Yom Kippur sacrifice? No, better than the blood of Abel. This is Sarah. This is Sarah. This tells you which covenant Yeshua's blood restores us back to so we could have life and we can overcome sin and death. Being brought back to the Abrahamic covenant will not save you from death and sin. Being brought back to the covenant that happened in the Garden of Eden when sin and death entered in the world and they were cast out of that place, that's where the blood of the Messiah comes in. That's the breach he stands in and seals by his blood. And that's how he's able to conquer sin and death, not by the Abrahamic covenant, but by the one that caused all of this in the first place. Right? Now, don't misunderstand me. The blood of Yeshua repairs all those breaches. That's how he's going to be able to fulfill and keep his promise for the seventh day, the 1,000-year millennial reign, right? In the land of promise. That's how he's going to keep that, because his blood seals that gap too, because he himself was the one that walked through those pieces in Genesis 15 and cut that covenant with Abraham. So his blood can see, he died, right? The covenant is, he died to the covenant. So the covenant, the new covenant is enacted by his blood. That's what we're taught. All right. So unto Yeshua, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks better than the blood of Abel, so we can have life in his name, so he can conquer sin and death, right? That's how he conquered sin and death. That's how sin and death entered into the world. Remember, by one man, sin entered into the world. And because of that, death by sin, or death through sin. So death passed upon all men, because we all humanity, because everybody sins, right? We all know that. That's the gap Yeshua breaches, because without that gap being breached, sin and death still reigns. And the last enemy that's going to be conquered on the day of judgment on the great white throne is going to be death, because it tells us that death and hell, the grave, is thrown into the lake of fire. No more death. So let's go to chapter 13 and verse 14. We'll start in verse 12. Therefore, Yeshua also, so that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate. So let us go to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach, because here we do not have a lasting city, not even during the time when it's there now. But the contrast word, on the other side, we are seeking for the one to come, the one he just told us about, his Father's house, right? So with that, I want to end this. I want to read through Hebrews chapter 9 and make some commentary as we go through it. This presentation is showing the difference between Hagar and Sarah. Okay, Hagar is not bad. Hagar is good and righteous and blessed. Sarah is better. Better. That's the point of Hebrews. The Messiah is better. His hope is better because it is the spiritual hope, the fullness in heaven, in the heavenly places where the heavenly Jerusalem is, where the heavenly temple is. It's better than the one on the shadow on earth. Hebrews chapter now. Now, even the first had requirements. Some say covenant, some say priesthood. The word's added in italics. Let's leave it out. Now, even the first had requirements of divine worship and the earthly sanctuary, because there was a tabernacle prepared. There is no doubt what this is talking about. This is talking about the first covenant, Hagar, right? The one cut at Mount Sinai, had the tabernacle and the priesthood. That's what this is talking about. This is talking about Hagar, because there was a tabernacle prepared. The first part, in which were the lampstand and the table and the sacred bread, which is called the holy place. Not was, the time Paul wrote this, it was still called the holy place, is called. This, all these words in Hebrews 9, a lot of English Bibles put them in the past tense, was, went. It's actually is and go, because they were still doing this, and they were doing it during the time before the destruction of the temple, during that 40-year period covered by Acts. Verse 3, Hebrews 9. And behind the second veil there was a tabernacle, which is called the Holy of Holies, having a golden altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant. Right? We know what covenant was in there. It was actually the covenant of what? Hagar. Righteous, although it is, but it was Hagar. It was the first covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna, and Aaron's rod which budded, and the tablets of the covenant. This, right? The covenant, the one that Moses broke, Yahuwah made a new one, wrote him again, gave him back to him, tablets of the covenant. 10 words on it, 10 commandments. Verse 5, and above it were the cherub of glory, overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot speak in detail. Now, when these things have been so prepared, the priests, that is the Levitical priests, right, are continually, not went, but are continually entering the first part of the tabernacle, performing the divine worship, right? The holy place, not the Holy of Holies. But into the second, that is the Holy of Holies, only the high priest enters once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. Day of Atonement, right? The Holy Spirit is indicating this, that the way, right? This is all Hagar's. Remember, we're talking about Hagar. The Holy Spirit is, because remember, the bloods of bulls and goats can never take away sins, including on Yom Kippur. It did not take away, it did not remove their sins, did it? It rolled them over to the next Yom Kippur. Why? Because only the blood of the Messiah could take away sins, which is the lesson they were supposed to be learning from Yom Kippur. Okay, so now we're in verse 8. The Holy Spirit is indicating this, that the way into the holy places had not yet been made known, while that first part of the tabernacle is still standing, which is a symbol for the present time. Accordingly, both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make the worshiper perfect in conscience. It cannot, to put it in Yeshua's terms, it cannot wash the inside of your cup. The book of the law could never wash the inside of your cup. It can show you the need that you had to have the inside of your cup washed clean, and that was by having a circumcised heart and confessing your sins to Yahuwah, right? It was not by the keeping of the actual physical commandments of the book of the law. It was those that were truly forgiven were those that cried out to Yahuwah from their circumcised heart, right? Sacrifices in verse 9 are offered, which cannot make the worshiper perfect in conscience, since they relate only to food and drink and various washings, requirements for the body. Hagar imposed until. That word is critically important to notice when it says until in your Bibles, because that means this is true up until a certain point, a certain time, a certain age, or whatever it is that comes. At this point in time in the future that it's talking about, things will change until a time of reformation, a time of setting matters straight. You can look at Galatians 3:19 and talk about that. That's Hagar. Verse 11 begins Sarah. But that word again, flip side of the coin, when Messiah appeared as a high priest, here's the contrast, here's the true that cast the shadow on earth, the, the type that's on earth, Hagar. But when Messiah appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation. Holy and holies up there. And not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. Sarah. Because, verse 13, if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer, which they're trying to do right now, we know, sprinkling those who have been defiled, sanctify, okay, the blood of goats and the ashes of the red heifer did what? For the cleansing of the flesh, the outside of the cup. Verse 13 tells you, for the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling those who have been defiled, sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh. Hagar. How much more will the blood of the Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? Sarah. The sacrifices and offerings were for Hagar. They cleansed the outside of the flesh. They didn't do anything to cleanse the inside. Clean the outside of the cup, the inside of the cup was still filthy. That can only be cleansed by the Spirit when one cried out with a repentant heart and had a soft, circumcised heart and cried out for forgiveness. That's Sarah. All those people listed in Hebrews chapter 11, that's those people. Verse 15, and for this reason, because of that, he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that, for the purpose of, since a death has taken place for the redemption of the trespasses that were committed under the first covenant, the one at Mount Sinai, to include Exodus 19 through 24, which includes the Abrahamic covenant, which was not kept. Those who have been called, invited to a marriage supper, that word means, may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. Sarah. Because where a covenant is, there must be necessity be the death of the one who made it. Because a covenant is valid only when men are dead. That's why it's cut with blood. Because it is never enforced while the one who made it lives. Therefore, not even the first covenant, the first one, was inaugurated without blood. But when every commandment had been spoken by Moses, all the people according to the law, this is for those that think that the book of the covenant is not the one it's talking about in this Hagar. Listen to what it says. Because when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves and goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the covenant which Yahuwah commanded you. Where did that happen? Exodus chapter 24 is where that happened. Cutting of the covenant before the addition of the book of the law. Isn't that when that was? Verse 21, and in the same way, both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry, he sprinkled with blood. And according to the law, one may almost say all things are cleansed with blood. Isn't that right? Because when you have the eyes to see, you see everything through the eyes of the Messiah, don't you? Through his blood. That's what all this blood spilling was supposed to show them. And without shedding of blood, there is no jubilee. This word used in our Greek Bibles, if you look in the Septuagint in Leviticus 25:10, this is the word that the people that wrote the Septuagint used to show the word Yobel in Hebrew, Jubilee, the forgiveness of all debts, return to your property, right? The Jubilee. Without the shedding of blood, there is no Jubilee, forgiveness. Therefore, because of what I just said, he says, Hagar, it was necessary for the copies, Hagar, of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. Sarah. Because Messiah, here comes Hagar, did not enter holy places made with hands, mere copies of the true ones. Here comes Sarah, but on the other hand, into heaven itself now, to appear in the presence of Yahuwah for us. That's Sarah. Nor was it that he would offer himself often as the high priest enters the holy places year by year with blood that is not his own. Otherwise, he would have needed to suffer once or often since the foundation of the world. That's Hagar. All that was Hagar. But now, on the other hand, here comes Sarah once at the consummation of the ages. He has been manifested to put away sin by the means of the sacrifice of himself. That's Sarah. And inasmuch as it is appointed for men once to die, and after this comes judgment, so Messiah also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time for salvation, deliverance without reference to sin. There's no more need to go in year by year. One and done, if you're truly in covenant with him. To those who eagerly await him, faithful stewards. The allegory of Sarah and Hagar is critically important to understand if you're going to understand the writings of Paul. It is critically important because he talks about it all throughout his epistles. Paul does not write to unbelievers, and he does not write to babies. He doesn't write to children. Paul's writings are for the mature, those that are on the path, the narrow road, the racetrack, with your eyes laser focused on the prize at the end, the tape, which is what? The Messiah. Being a faithful steward. Why do we do that? Because we are just strangers and pilgrims here. We have a lasting city that he said he went to make for us. That's Sarah. So when you read Paul's epistles and you see verses where he's talking about that it sounds like he's anti for the law. And then there's also verses from books where he talks about where he's for the law. You say he's schizophrenic. What's he doing? If you understand Sarah and Hagar, then you know exactly what he's doing. He says the book of the law is righteous and holy and good, which it is, if, if a man uses it lawfully. If you use it for its intended purpose, what was its intended purpose? Galatians tells us it was a pedagogue, a babysitter, a signpost to teach you and keep you safe until you, a child, became mature. Right? That's what he said in Galatians. It raises you. It grows you up. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Yahuwah. As a child, you grow up to maturity. When you come mature, you inherit what you were supposed to inherit that you couldn't as a child when you come to full growth. Right? Sarah is for the overcomer. Sarah is for those that have the faith of Sarah and all those other ones that walk by righteous faith. It is for those that are on the race, that touch the tape at the end. It is those that are talking. This is speaking of those that are called or invited and called to a supper, a banquet that was given at weddings, is what that specific Greek word says. And that's what Paul tells you. He says, to those that are called, not called to be saints, those words are added. They are called saints. They are set apart ones that are invited to this marriage supper. And the way you get into that marriage supper, people will have a fit about this. But let God be true and every man a liar. Revelation chapter 19 in verse 7. Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, because the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. And it was given to her, his bride, to clothe herself, not be clothed by somebody else, but to clothe themselves in fine linen, bright and clean, because the fine linen is not the righteousness of the Messiah that gives you life. This is for the overcomers. Because the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. This is for the faithful stewards. When Yeshua says the blessings will come, some 30, some 30-fold, some 60-fold, some 100-fold, the land, the city, and the city above. The ones that walk in overcoming faith. So that's my presentation, a short one, although it was, and we didn't look at everything by any means. But it's important to understand, because when Paul speaks, you need to understand what Paul is talking about when he talks about the law. When he talks about the law being bad compared to good, if you understand Sarah and Hagar, then you understand what they're doing throughout the whole book of Acts. Those people were trying to drag elements of Hagar and impose it on people that were walking in Sarah under the terms of the new covenant, which Yeshua himself says hinges on love Yahuwah with all God, with all of your hearts, your minds, and your strength, and to love your neighbors as yourself. On these two great commands hang all of the Torah and the prophets, all of it, whether it's covenant or Levitical. Those two great commands are those that keep those two great commands by faith are those that have circumcised hearts. Because you can't love your neighbor and you can't love our Father if your heart is not circumcised. That's the fruit. That's the two. The 10 illuminate those two. And that's the truth. That's the term of the Messiah's new covenant. Because Hebrews tells us the priesthood being changed when John the Baptist came out of Qumran, out of the desert, as the last legitimate Zadokite high priest, Mikvah Yeshua, the priesthood was changed from Levitical to Melchizedek, from the first covenant to the new covenant, from Hagar to Sarah. So when you read Paul, put your glasses on, Sarah and Hagar, and be prayerfully diligent to compare the things that carry through and the things that, like Second Timothy says, study to show yourself approved of God, a workman that does not need to be ashamed, rightly dissecting the word of truth. That word is a Greek word, and it means a precise surgical cut, like a surgeon uses. Things that do not carry through into this age from the previous age, we cut. And it's been rendered idle. Not because we're trying to do it. That's what Yeshua told us to do. Right? And the things that bear through or carry through, we carry those through. The things that need to be left behind, Philippians, Paul, remember, I was a Pharisee, the Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin, blah, 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 all anything else. All these things, he says, all these Hagar things, Hagar, I count it as excrement compared with Sarah, the excellency that is in Messiah. See the two. So today, if you're in Sarah, stop trying to take Hagar into Sarah and bind it on others. Stop it. Go on to full growth, maturity, pleroma in Greek, perfection. That you take a cup and you take a picture of water and you fill it and you keep filling it, and pretty soon it gets full, and then you keep filling it, then it overflows, and then you keep filling it, and it continually overflows. That's you. That should be you. Pleroma, go on to full, complete fullness. Like Yeshua was the fullness of Yahuwah in bodily form. Philippians tells us he emptied himself and he became obedient to the cross, right? So he can institute and cut the new covenant and fix the other covenants that was broken due to lack of faith. So thank you. I appreciate your time. I pray that you lift these things up before Yahuwah. If you don't understand the difference in covenants and you need more information, please go to my YouTube channel. I got rid of a lot of stuff on there that was from other people. I just have my own stuff on there now, pretty much. Very simple stuff to understand. I'm not trying to say I'm anything great because I'm not. I'm just being faithful to the stewardship he's given me. We all have our gifts. The gift he's given me was to be able to teach other people. So that's what I'm doing. It's just his. I'm passing it on. If I'm passing it on incorrectly, please tell me so I can be corrected. So God bless you. May you walk in the spirit of the Messiah, and may you be greatly blessed in your studies.